So I just got back from Charlie Kirk's memorial. And since he was killed, I've been thinking about how we got to a place where people think that violence is an acceptable response to free speech. I want to share this perspective with you because a lot of it comes down to the breakdown of meaning in words, particularly in political discourse. Here's the thing about language. There's no one who gets to define language. Traditionally, the way that dictionaries would codify language was descriptive and not prescriptive. What I mean by that is that even the most authoritative dictionaries like Merriam-Webster and the Oxford English Dictionary, when they come together and define words, they're not telling people what the definitions of words should be. They're telling people what the definitions of words are currently in the culture. And historically, that hasn't been a big issue, right? Because this would be a very grassroots sort of democratic process where a dictionary group would look at how words have been used in the culture for the last several years and come up with some coherent definitions of how the vast majority of people would use words. So words like fascist, racist, Nazi, far left, far right, authoritarian, all of these words would have commonly accepted definitions that the majority of the population would be able to converse and communicate around. And then what happened was social media. And social media has distorted the amount of influence that any individual person can have. Specifically, social media has given every single human being on planet Earth a potential megaphone. I want you to think about this. I have the ability to reach more people in a single video or a single post on X than Jesus Christ himself had in his entire lifetime, right? I can have a video go viral and reach 50 million people in a day. It's quite remarkable. And you can do the same thing too. And that's profoundly powerful. And power can be used either for constructive ends or destructive ends. And what's happened is that a minority of people in this country now have the ability to set terms and dictate what language means for the majority. So many of you, of course, remember back in the 2024 election, a big part of the election, culturally speaking, wasn't even about politics. It was about stuff like children going through gender transitions and what the definition of man and woman is. And part of the reason that Kamala lost is because a strong majority of the Democratic Party didn't resonate with the positions of the far left. And taking positions like a man and a woman, these aren't really definitions, and it's okay if a little girl says, I feel like I should be more like a boy. These beliefs are actually very fringe ideas that had a megaphone due to social media. Now, why does that matter for the current discourse? Well, if words don't have commonly accepted meanings, and if one of the commonly accepted meanings of a word is actually dictated by the fringe, it means you can start saying things like, words are violence. And if you actually go to Merriam-Webster or Oxford English Dictionary, violence is defined as physical force. It's always physical. Words aren't violent. Thoughts aren't violent. Ideas aren't violent. Physical action is violent. So if you look at the First Amendment, there's certain forms of speech that are not protected, like incitements to violence. So if I sit here on the beach and I tell people, hey, go attack that man, go kill him, that's not protected speech. The government has the right to use force to restrain me from using words like that. But there's a reason why we very narrowly define incitement to violence. And it's very hard for you to cross a threshold of incitement to violence. But the commonplace understanding of the fact that words aren't violence seems to have broken down, particularly on college campuses. I want to share an interesting stat with you. The FIRE, which is a research organization, recently did a poll on college campuses of how many students on the left or the right are supportive of using violence to stop speakers from speaking on their campus. And they found that 36 to 37% of both liberals and conservative, actually very liberals and very conservatives, were supportive of using violence to stop speakers from coming to their campus and speak. Think about that. Fully 1/3 of these groups on college campuses are both supportive of using violence to quell speech. And it might surprise you to hear that it's both very conservative and very liberal. You might be wondering why that is. Well, as many of you know, I went to Harvard. I was at Harvard from around 2009 to 2014. I took about 2 years off in the middle there. And while I was there, I started noticing the rise of people trying to cancel speakers from coming to campus before they even started to speak. And I remember getting emails saying, hey, this bad person is coming to campus. We have to go protest. They can't be allowed to speak here. And it seems that things have only gotten worse since I graduated, to the point where, I don't remember anyone at that time advocating people being violent to stop a speaker, just more trying to shout them down or put pressure on the administration to uninvite them. And now people are advocating full-blown violence in some cases. If you look at the stats for the broader population, people believing that violence is an acceptable means to accomplish political ends is the majority of people on either side don't believe that, but the minority of people who do believe that's okay is bigger on the political left. So why is it that on college campuses, it's about even between liberals, very liberals and very conservative? Well, that's because, and I'm speculating here, but what I'm observing is that liberals have justified using violence for years, and now conservatives who feel attacked on campuses feel like they just need to fight fire with fire. If you actually look at the chart, you'll see that around 2021, the number of conservatives who were in support of using violence to stop speakers from speaking at their campuses rapidly increased, and the number of liberals started high but didn't really increase. And I think what we're seeing now is this retaliatory cycle where the far left says, hey, we think it's acceptable to use violence to stop people from speaking. And then the far right says, okay, well, you're doing that to our people, so we're going to do it to yours. And this is what happens when the meanings of words break down. If I were to ask a random person, I actually might do this in a content piece, what the definition of fascist is, or Nazi, or racist, they would probably have a definition that is vague and or not in alignment with what the dictionary says the definition of these words is. And at another level, what's actually happening is that people are using these words not precisely, but instead to signal their moral condemnation. If you actually look at the definition of fascism, I'm going to put it up on screen here. Most governments throughout human history were actually fascist governments. Most governments throughout human history were monarchies where a king could literally just kill you because you said the wrong thing and suppress political opposition with violent force. So the idea of liberal democracy and free speech is a very new invention of the last 250 plus years. It's an invention of the Enlightenment era. We could describe those governments as fascist and no one would have a problem with them because people would say, well, that's what we've always done. There's nothing wrong with having a king who has absolute power. Now, I'm not justifying fascism because I don't think it's compatible with American values at all, right? We're a liberal democracy for a good reason, or technically a republic for a good reason. But what has happened is these terms have become essentially political swear words that people use to shut down conversation. And Jeffrey Mead, some of you might follow him, he made a really good point about what's been happening on the left in particular is this permission structure for violence has been devised, where you get to call people a bunch of terms that are not precisely defined, fascist, Nazi, far right, authoritarian. People don't actually know what they mean, but they know how they feel when they hear those words. And when those words are used to label someone, all of a sudden violence is justified to stop that person. Because if you think of terms like fascist and authoritarian, who do you think of? Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini. And many people feel that violence is justified to stop people like that who are genuine fascists. Another layer of the problem here, we have this very binary framing of politics. And what we do is we create a false dichotomy. A false dichotomy is presenting only two choices when in fact there are more than two choices. So one could argue that the entire two-party system is a false dichotomy. Republican, Democrat, left, right, conservative, liberal. And part of the problem here is that politics is actually a spectrum, right? There's people who are all the way far to the right and genuinely support fascism. There's people all the way to the left and who genuinely support communism. But in reality, people fall somewhere in the middle. Not directly in the middle, but somewhere in between in the spectrum. So if you want to think of things numerically, let's say that the scale is negative 100 to 100. And let's say negative 100 is straight up Marxist communism. And let's say that positive 100 is straight up Hitlerian fascism. Anything on the 0 to negative 100 side of the scale is on the communist side of the scale. It's on the leftist part of the scale. Anything from 0 to 100 is on the fascist part of the scale. It's on the right or red part of the scale. And therefore, anything that is a plus 1 to 100 resembles fascism to a degree. Anything that's negative 1 to negative 100 resembles communism to a degree. The problem here is that people aren't thinking with this level of nuance and proportionality. So they see something that's like a level 20 on the scale of 0 to 100, and they're like, well, this resembles what's at the other end of the scale at 100, so it's fascism. Or they say it resembles fascism. It's like, yeah, of course it resembles fascism because it's on the right side of the scale. The question is not whether it resembles fascism. The question is it too far? Let's be precise. Same thing with communism. If someone pushes for, I don't know, universal healthcare, that's more to the left side of the scale. Let's say that's at a negative 30 on the scale. That's on the part of the scale that resembles communism, but it's not the same thing as communism. But unfortunately, the way that we use these words is so tribal, and we're weaponizing these words, and we don't even seem to really know what they mean anymore. And that's how you get to a point where not only does one mentally ill individual decide to kill Charlie Kirk, but people actually celebrate it because people have started to conflate words with violence. So how do we get out of this situation? We have to demand precision in our vocabulary at all times. I actually just had a recent appearance on Jubilee. For those of you who don't know, Jubilee is a YouTube media production company that hosts political conversations. You've probably seen their series Surrounded, where there's one person sitting in the middle and then a bunch of people, often college students, come up to the plate and debate them one after another. And it gets very heated, lots of viral clips. Charlie Kirk actually did one of those. I think it was maybe last year during the election season. So I was on a different one of their shows. It was called Roundtable. And there was a moment where the young lady who was opposite me, she identified as a leftist. She was asked by someone, the guy who was next to me who identified as a conservative, do you hate Donald Trump? And then she got into this very vague answer, and she was trying to explain herself. And I don't blame her, right? Like, it's hard to answer yes or no questions on the spot, especially when you're on a live show, because you don't want to be misunderstood if you just say yes or no. So what I tried to do is I said, okay, my definition, let's just use this definition of hatred. Let's say hatred is harboring ill will towards someone such that you would wish harm upon them. Do you hate Donald Trump? And then she gave her answer, and it was still a bit vague, but eventually she landed on something like, no, I don't want him to be harmed. So the reason I did that, the reason I defined what I was talking about when I said hatred was not because my definition is right. Like, we're in a live conversation. I didn't look up the dictionary. Like, normal conversations, no one looks at the dictionary before they speak. But because I think it's important to at least define some definition so we're talking about the same thing in that conversation. Because an imperfect definition is better than no definition. And what's happened in the culture is we have no definition for emotionally charged words, and we use them in ways that are getting people demonized, canceled, convicted, and killed. And we just got to stop it. So demand precision in your conversations. If you find that you're in a political conversation or even just a heated interpersonal conversation with someone, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is make sure that you define terms before you litigate whether something is racist or sexist or misogynistic or far right, far left, whatever it is. Just make sure you're on the same page with that person about what you're even talking about in the first place. This is one of the things that we talk about in Clear Thinker Academy, by the way. On our first Clear Thinker call, we actually assessed the comments that Charlie Kirk made about 4 particular Black women, and we addressed the question, hey, is this actually racism? And it was interesting because there was differences of opinion in the group until I actually gave people a definition of racism. And that's why Clear Thinker Academy exists, because it's supposed to be a sane space for clear thinking and precise conversations about things that you can't find on social media. So if that sounds like it'll be valuable to you personally, and you want to be a part of a solution to the problem that I just identified, join Clear Thinker Academy. There's 1 week left in the pre-order process, so this is a great time to get a discount on it. And also, if you pre-order Clear Thinker Academy, you get to be a part of the bonus call that we have upcoming on October 1st, as well as get access to a recording of the Clear Thinker call that I just talked about as well. So would love to have you join. We got lots of people in there who are committed to clear thinking, and I would love to have you in there as well. And also, I want to start giving more value to my paid subscribers on Substack. So if you are a paid subscriber, there's going to be an AMA, an Ask Me Anything, a live interview with me where you get to ask me questions and I will answer them on air. And that's going to happen Friday. So you can drop comments below, and those will be the questions that I answer Friday. Take care. Be precise. Talk to you soon.